Good evening. I'm Patrick Lewis, Director of Collections and Research at the Filson Historical Society. Thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's program. For some introductory remarks on tonight's program on the Fringe of Society, Revitalizing Historic Payne Hollow, I would like to hand the podium over to the chair of the Filson Board's Collections Committee, Ted Steinbach.
What a pleasure to be here and to share, I think, a shared passion that we all have for Anna and Harlan Hubbard and their way of life, living along the Ohio. I see friends that I visited with Anna and Harlan as a high school student with the Weeders who are here tonight. And this has been a dream come true to now protect this property and to really kind of emphasize and publicize the legacy that they have with sustainable living, with a way of life that's simple and yet so rich. And I'd like to introduce our tonight's speakers, who are two of the board members of Payne Hollow on the Ohio. And also here tonight, I think there are at least 9 or 10 of the 18 advisory board members that have been so helpful in making and having us come to where we are today. We started this literally about 6 months ago, raised funds for the purchase of the property in record time, thanks to the Owsley Brown II Foundation, thanks to the vision of Christy Brown, thanks to the faith of Osha Cowley-Sherman, who's here tonight, and who really, their matching grant was the critical factor in having us purchase the property. So tonight's speakers are two of our board members, Jessica Whitehead, who is curator at the Kentucky Derby Museum. She is a true Hubbard scholar. She's already written a very important book on his watercolors, and she is soon coming out with the definitive biography of Harlan Hubbard. David Wicks, who is our board chair, does everything Ohio River. I mean, talk about a river rat. He is our board chair. He's also co-chair of the Ohio River Way. He is on multiple other boards. He, most importantly, is an educator, and he has had the vision to bring us to where we are today. So I want to introduce them and now let them tell you more about Payne Hollow. Okay.
You know, my name is David Wicks, and I am board chair, and it's a pure pleasure to be here tonight at the Filson Historical Society to talk about our work at Payne Hollow. But before we begin, I'd like to provide some background on the connections between Payne Hollow and its neighboring river towns and the Ohio River. But just as Ted did, we certainly want to thank the Owsley Brown Fraser Family Foundation and the 200 plus others who really have made this possible. Many of Harlan Hubbard's articles were published in Oyo anthologies. Titles include To Build My Own Boat and on the River and Drift Down the Ohio. I Was Born with a Love for the River, Shanty Boat Drifting, Crossing the River, and the River Itself. One of my favorite articles in this series is called To Glide Around the Bend That Seems Endless, in which he quotes, "No part of life is worth living again." That's a friend saying that. And I replied, "Only the canoe trips. My canoeing has been done on the Ohio River and its tributaries when I was young. Expert canoeists are not likely to consider the Ohio River a canoe river. Their kind of river is narrow, swift, whitewater stream in the wilderness. Not knowing that there were canoe rivers, I became to love the Ohio, never realizing its shortcomings and finding many values and virtues peculiar only to itself. To glide around a river or to glide around a bend that seems endless, where current gurgles around and through flooded trees, whose green branches whip back and forth in a strong flow, pulling clear when the tension grows strong. Under overhanging branches and around drift logs caught among the trees. At length, the new reach downstream opens to your view. The blue hills at the end of the reach, miles away, appear to block the river. But as you draw nearer, its true course is revealed. Mr. Hubbard was a true lover of the Ohio River. Don Willis, the Oyo editor, writes, "The books Shanty Boat and Payne Hollow, taken together with his art, form an autobiography of a gifted man, a painter, a writer, musician, who consciously set himself to live on the fringes of modern life." The Oyo anthology, which is illustrated by Harlan Hubbard, is a collection of about 100 works about the river by writers, poets, historians, and dedicated river rats. The Oyo series demonstrates that Mr. Hubbard's connections to the literary figures of the Ohio River were very strong, despite his reputation as a solitary man exploring the Ohio River, often by himself. That is until the late 1940s when he met Anna, and then they used a shanty boat. Living as a couple alone on the river and deeply connected to the river, the land, as well as community members. Payne Hollow is at River Mile 567, and it's on a new water trail called the Ohio Riverway, which Ted said I'm co-chair of. The Owsley Brown Fraser Family Foundation is also a significant supporter of that. 3 years ago, the Ohio Riverway began establishing a national water trail from Portsmouth, Ohio to West Point, Kentucky, a 275-mile stretch along the Ohio River, with the support of the National Park Service and the River Trails and Conservation Assistance Program. This existing network is helping Payne Hollow develop strong and meaningful partnerships up and down the river. Just as Mr. Hubbard did 70 years ago, we're promoting that personal exploration of the Ohio River. We're working with our 35 river towns to reconnect with the river. Harlan Hubbard is known for his simple, self-sufficient lifestyle and his artistic vision of the Ohio, and hopefully it'll be accessible to all. Hubbard believed that the Ohio River should be protected and preserved as a natural resource, that the river is used for transportation, recreation, and a source of clean water and food. He believed that the river was and is a source of inspiration and beauty. The Ohio Riverway is working with these river towns to celebrate the river and the creative spirit embodied by Anna and Harlan Hubbard. Portsmouth, Ohio, at the beginning, or is at the confluence of the Scioto River, and that's the beginning of the Ohio Riverway. Hubbard explored the Scioto River. They just received significant dollars to transform their waterfront and their connections to the river. Their current mayor, Sean Dunn, just received a grant from Burning Man to have a festival of art on the Ohio River. So Burning Man in the Ohio River Valley. Vanceburg, Kentucky is bringing the Showboat Majestic to celebrate the Ohio River music. It's interesting that before the Hubbards settled at Payne Hollow, they scouted out land at Vanceburg. Maysville is being re-energized with a new public art and dynamic downtown, all with a focus on the river. Another historic home is being saved, the birthplace of Colonel Charles Young, who commanded an army regiment during the Spanish-American War, and afterwards he was the first African-American superintendent of a national park. Hubbard visited Maysville and did woodcuts on the waterfront, and these were published in the Hubbard Journals 1929 to 1944. Augusta is said to be the prettiest town in Kentucky, the home of Rosemary Clooney Museum, which is owned by Steve and Heather French Henry, who are also supporters of Payne Hollow. New Richmond is the home of a cardboard boat museum and is a central focus for the Underground Railroad research. The Thomas More Biological Field Station is the oldest university research station on the Ohio River, and they're kindred spirits. Cincinnati in northern Kentucky at River Mile 475 is where Harlan Hubbard grew up and met Anna. They built their shanty boat on the banks of the Ohio in Brent. And the Fort Thomas Forest Conservancy maintains the other art studio behind the home of the house that he built for his mother. Members of the Fort Thomas Forest Conservancy, as well as Behringer Crawford, are a part of both the Payne Hollow Board and our advisory committees. Beebe, Indiana has had relationships with the Hubbards and also with Louisville. Beebe also is the home of another wonderful artist, Anne Farnsley. Madison and Hanover were frequently visited by the Hubbards. They had deep relationships with many people and spent much time at the Hanover University Library. 35 miles downstream of Hanover or of Payne Hollow is Louisville and the Falls of the Ohio. On their 5-year shanty boat, the Hubbards tied up at Towhead Island near Waterfront Park and spent several days. These rivertown communities admire, are inspired, and want to build upon the Hubbards' love of the river and provide opportunities to experience the solitude, the beauty, and the adventure that the Ohio River has to offer. We're really looking forward to working with them. We've been talking about the deep connection that the Hubbards had with the Ohio River and the neighboring river towns. To explore it further, check out Morgan's Atkinson's documentary, Wonder. Morgan is currently working on another documentary on the 981 miles of the Ohio River called Ohio, Life, Death, and Rebirth of a Beautiful River. Consider supporting him, and I think I saw Morgan in the audience. Payne Hollow on the Ohio was officially incorporated and received its 501c3 status this past summer. Many, many thanks to the pro bono work of the firm Frost, Brown, and Todd. It made it all possible. As Ted mentioned, a 4-person board was established with Ted and Joe Wallach, who is here, and Jessica, our next speaker. And we recently elected a Northern Kentucky lawyer named Tommy Simondinger, and he's a real estate guy, but he's also on the board of the Behringer Crawford Museum. We've also established an advisory board, which many people are here tonight, and Ted, I think there's 20 members, not 18. Our work is driven by an intense, long-term, long-range planning and is broken into committees. I'm going to describe a couple of these committees as we're looking for support. Not only financial, which is certainly very important, but volunteer time and energy. Our first committee was committees, administration, finance, and fundraising committees are focused on insurance and finance and legal responsibilities, and to certainly ensure that we have the funds, necessary funds to operate. The Education Committee is planning off-site activities. Payne Hollow for the next year or so will be under renovation. Currently, there are no restrooms, no facilities. During the renovation and the planning phase, there will be no public access, and we're working to redo the buildings and the paths and to make it safe. We have much work to do, but we do have public programs set up in Madison, Indiana. We are there in January or February, and Behringer Crawford in April 4th. The Communication Committee is active on social media, and if you haven't checked out Joe Wallach's website, paynehollowontheohio.org, many, please do. And Bob Hill is back over there, and many kudos to him and the CJ for their wonderful article. That article was just one of many. The Building and Grounds Committee is cleaning up the property and assessing immediate needs and planning for the restoration of all the buildings and internal walking paths. Tomorrow, we're meeting with the Kentucky Heritage Council and the Kentucky State Historic Preservation Office to ensure that our renovations of the Hubbard's home and the art studio meets National Historic Standards. And if you want more information than that, I'll see Joanne Weeder, who's back over there. She's our specialist for that. All I can say is be patient before we begin any work. We'll have a renovation and landscape plan completed that meets and exceeds the state and national historic standards. Things take time. The river will still be flowing next year, and it'll still be flowing the year after that. We're continuing the development of the Payne Hollow Ecological Database developed by Deb White, a retired Kentucky state botanist. Interestingly, after 2 visits, 120 unique species have been identified with an abundance of edible and medicinal plants, which we believe were really nurtured by the Hubbards. We are pleased to announce that Payne Hollow is partnering with the U of L Speed School National Science Foundation grant called the Community Engagement Ecosystem Research this summer to continue this baseline inventory of Payne Hollow's ecology and geography. We're looking for some undergraduate students and graduate students. So if you know of anybody who's still in school or recently graduated, we have a job for them. The grant also supports research teams on Beargrass Creek, downtown Louisville, and in southern Indiana in Charleston. The organization Payne Hollow on the Ohio, The organization Payne Hollow on the Ohio is only 6 months old. We have much to do and relationships and partnerships to develop. It is our intent to work with these Ohio River communities, the educational institutions, the museums and art galleries to really think about the future of our river and the Hubbards. Our goal is to promote the legacy of the Hubbards and their lifestyle, preserve the buildings and land, and respect and love the Ohio River. We believe in being neighborly, open, honest, and patient. I'd like to introduce my fellow board member, Jessica, and as it was said, she does her day job at the Derby Museum, but she really is a driving force of Payne Hollow on the Ohio. She's secretary of the board, chief archivist, social media guru for the organization. And as Ted mentioned, she is co-author of the watercolors of Harlan Hubbard and has a contract with UK to do her next book. Thank you very much. And let me introduce Jessica.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. And we're just so pleased to get to update you on this magnificent project. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about Payne Hollow, the history of the building and the landscape, a little bit of history about the Hubbards. And I also want to dive in a little bit deeper about some of what's been keeping us busy over the last 4 months. And there is a lot of it. So I'm looking forward to diving in. And as David has already mentioned, our website is filled with resources. So we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you right now, but I really want to encourage you to check out that website. There's lots of resources there to learn and to support us. I'm also not going to spend too much of our remaining time because we are limited for time telling you too much about the lives of Harlan and Anna Hubbard prior to 1942. And there are, as I mentioned, lots of resources that you can check out to learn a little bit more about their early lives. But suffice it to say that Harlan and Anna Hubbard were remarkably creative souls, and their unique chemistry allowed them to build a life together here at Payne Hollow that they found meaningful, beautiful, and responsible. And that's something that means a lot to us and our mission. Now, Anna was a college-educated classical musician and a librarian before she met Harlan Hubbard, and she brought a fastidious and practical elegance to their radical lifestyle. And Harlan, who was a trained artist, an aspiring writer, an avid musician, a skilled contractor, and a great all-around outdoorsman and riverman, was, and I like to quote Walt Whitman when I say this, he was afoot with his vision of an off-the-grid experience that he could really be proud of. And Harlan and Anna met later in life. They married in their 40s, and their second act together, I think, was filled with probably more adventure and purpose than 20 ordinary lifetimes. Really remarkable, and all of it culminated in a legacy embodied by the home that they built together in Trimble County, Kentucky, and that's Payne Hollow, why we're here tonight. And there at Payne Hollow, Harlan and Anna Hubbard became sustainability pioneers. They were living on the fringe of society in their handcrafted, bespoke homestead, and they were foraging for their own food, living lives of creative hard work and beautiful simplicity. And although they were dissimilar in temperament and in personality in a lot of ways, they each valued solitude, quietness, and the freedom to live simply and sustainably close to nature and also away from the expectations of the modern world. That was what Payne Hollow was about. But Payne Hollow was not their first experiment like this. Immediately after they were married in 1943, the Hubbards began to consider how they wanted to spend their lives together. And unlike some more traditional couples who might have settled into a quotidian mid-century lifestyle of jobs, mortgage, family, Harlan and Anna decided to become shanty boaters. And they built themselves a small houseboat on the shore of the Ohio River at Brent in northern Kentucky, while they lived in a makeshift shack on the shore of the Ohio. And the shantyboat dream had been long held by Harlan Hubbard, but not necessarily by Anna. And Harlan writes, "She was not at all the shantyboat type, and she had no river in her upbringing. Indeed, she had scarcely taken a good look at the Ohio River, though librarian in Cincinnati for some years, until I introduced her to it. She was town-bred, to all appearances of a conservative mind, with high standards of respectability and cleanliness, the least likely person to accept a rough life on the muddy river. Yet she showed no hesitation. In fact, she encouraged the immediate undertaking of the shantyboat venture after I had told her of my leanings in that direction." And in late May 1952, after they had returned from their shantyboat journey, Harlan and Anna began making some excursions up and down the river. And actually, began making some excursions up and down the river to try and find a place to put down roots in Kentucky. And their first stops yielded really nothing but disappointment to them. And until they returned to the place where they had made their first summer camp during the shantyboat years. And this was a little hollow in the rolling hills of Trimble County called Payne's Landing. And Harlan Hubbard freely admits, and I've done lots of research to try and ascertain who Payne is. We do not know who that particular Payne is, and neither did Harlan, a mystery for further unraveling later on. But they settled at a place called Payne's Landing, and they renewed their acquaintance with one of the farmers who had land above the hollow, and his name was Owen Hammond. And they hiked down to the landing with him on June 17th, 1952, and Harlan wrote in his journal, "After a while, we walked down to Payne Hollow, down to the river, by the familiar trail. All is just about as we left it. It seems overgrown, but perhaps if we had seen it in June instead of February, it would have seemed the same then." Hammond introduced them to the land's owner. His name was Ansel McCord, who agreed to let them rent a portion of the river bottomland and as a temporary campsite. And so just a few days after they hiked back in after several years away on their shantyboat, on June 20th, Owen Hammond hitches their makeshift camping trailer that they had built after they sold their shantyboat in New Orleans, hitches it to his tractor and hauls it down a very steep ravine through the woods down to Payne Hollow, where they set up their first camp that they had purchased from Ansel McCord. Now, the first thing the Hubbards did, and it was always the first thing the Hubbards did, was they got to work planting their first garden. And they added pole beans and corn to the naturally growing crops in the hollow. And Harlan Hubbard said of this period in his journal, "We pick purslane and lamb's quarter and poke from the rows and edges of the cornfield, our one source of vegetables now." And in July, they add more beans, beets, mustard greens, and begin sleeping in an abandoned tobacco barn nearby instead of sleeping in their tiny cramped camper. And Harlan also begins making plans to build a flat-bottom john boat that would become a huge part of their life at Payne Hollow, but that would enhance their ability to fish, to put out trot lines into the Ohio River, and to help them transport supplies back and forth from the Indiana shore to Kentucky. And then in August, something bad happened. They were spending a few days back in Fort Thomas, where David mentioned he had built a home for his mother and himself in the 1920s, and also a studio for himself. They were spending a few days back in Fort Thomas, and the abandoned barn that they were staying in was robbed by thieves. They never figured out who that was, and it really scared them. And Harlan wrote, "Perhaps someday we will have a shelter into which we can crawl so that we will not feel so insecure." And not 2 days later, on September 12th, they signed an agreement with Ansel McCord to purchase their first 7 acres of land at Payne Hollow and begin building their home. And I love this quote from September 17th, just a few days after they purchased their land, where Harlan writes about the process of surveying the land for the first time in a sort of DIY situation. He says, "Yesterday, a bright windy day, we did some surveying with a plumb line and framing square to get some marks on the hillside, how many feet above the pool stage. By fastening the square with one arm plumb and sighting along the other, a mark on a tree toward the river was obtained. This height I measured by climbing a tree and dropping a line. Then we set up the square again at the base of this tree, a tall locust. Another mark was taken on a cottonwood near the river, and this was measured. We figured our original mark was 65 feet above pool, 20 feet above the 1884 flood, and perhaps 10 above the 1937. And of course, you may know the 1937 flood was one of the most devastating in Ohio River history." And he continued, "This morning, Anna and I were up on the hillside trying to evolve a house in our minds and place it there. It's an exciting business to be building a boat and a house together. This is almost more than I can manage, not only the work to be done, but the creative planning. The house especially. It takes considerable imagination to build on that difficult and uncompromising hillside where there is no road, not even a path. Everything will have to be backpacked to the site. This is something we are still dealing with as the Payne Hollow board and advisors. Everything, including our water, our toilet paper, our food, gets backpacked in still. And we like that because that's part of what Harlan wanted, that separation from the world. But the first iteration of Payne Hollow didn't look like this picture. The first iteration of the house was a single room cabin, and it's now toward the back of the present day structure. And it was something they were able to partially construct before the coldest winter weather arrived in 1952. And so they moved from the abandoned tobacco barn, where they didn't feel very safe, into this unfinished cabin on November 12th, 1952, and started to reflect on their progress. And perhaps Harlan looked back in his journals and saw that exactly a month earlier, he had written this in his journals. "Anna worked with me this afternoon. We raised the other corner posts, and after she went down to get supper, I put a beam across one side, which will support the rafters. The work proceeds very slowly, but so it should be. The building of a house is a serious rite, and each step is significant. You are creating more than a shelter. It will become part of you." Harlan and Anna Hubbard passed away in the mid to late 1980s after several decades living in this amazing house that did become part of them. And they left the Payne Hollow property in the care of their hired hand, caretaker, and kindred spirit, a man named Paul Hasfurter. And he is actually shown in this photograph talking to Harlan, and this photo is sitting on Payne Hollow's mantelpiece right now. And Hasperder was a faithful steward of Payne Hollow for decades until his health really prevented him from being able to continue with the considerable maintenance that is needed at this property. And so our organization formed with the intention of restoring the Hollow structures and land back to the historic Hubbard era condition. And as David has described, our mission has been met with extraordinary enthusiasm and support, allowing us to purchase the property, as he said, in record time and begin the important work ahead. And this is a great photo. That's Harlan and Paul waving to a steamboat out on the river. So what is this important work? What have we been up to for the past 4 months? Well, we have been keeping busy in a couple main areas, and those are the areas that I'm going to highlight for you here. The first is identifying and safeguarding artifacts from the Hubbard and Hasperder eras of Payne Hollow. The second is clearing up the property, ensuring that the structures are safe and dry and that the trails are clear. And the third is conducting surveys and documenting the site to help us understand our historic and natural assets. And our first order of business has really been a big job. It's been a thorough clean out and cleanup of the property, both inside and out, trying to identify what has historic significance from the lives of Harlan and Anna Hubbard and also from the lives of Paul Hasperder. And here you can see the iconic front room of the home at Payne Hollow with the beautiful floor-to-ceiling tall windows. And this is after we were able to do our first straightening, removing debris from this room and pulling our first load of artifacts out for cataloging, which I'll talk about in a moment. And as you may or may not know, Harlan Hubbard gave the majority of his and Anna's papers to the University of Louisville before his death. And he also gave sizable collections of paintings and other artworks to the Behringer Crawford Museum, to Hanover, and also to the executor of his artistic estate, Bill Cadell. But what remains at Payne Hollow from the Hubbards is still very extensive. And with each visit that we make that is focused on gathering these artifacts and organizing them, we find new treasures, like these photographs and notes. And I have a couple of them displayed up here on the table that you can check out after the talk. Photographs and notes about steamboats and other vessels on the Ohio River from Harlan's personal collection. And Harlan was enamored with steamboats and had a really encyclopedic knowledge of them from his years observing river traffic. And he would have used this archive of photographs and notes to assist him in any special paintings or commissions that he was completing, because steamboats were, of course, one of his favorite subjects to paint. And we have one from Ted Steinbach's collection up here that you can check out also after the talk. And during Paul Hasperder's time working and living at Payne Hollow, he and his visitors took and shared many photographs of the property that are now part of our collection. And all of this can help us establish really important baselines for how the buildings and the landscapes evolved throughout the 1980s and beyond. Some of the images are even of Harlan, which is wonderful, taken between 1986 and his death in 1988. Payne Hollow also still contains not only some of the art supplies and tools of Paul Hasperder, who was also an artist, but its contents are giving us great insight into the tools and supplies used by Harlan Hubbard during his career. And most of these were found in this building, sometimes called the studio, sometimes called the workshop. It was a multi-purpose structure located slightly up the hill from the main house, where the Hubbards had a tool shed, a wood shed, a workshop, a privy, a painting studio, pretty much everything wrapped into one. And perhaps the most exciting find is this piece that is also on display up here on the table. It is a wooden paint box, which still had pencils, brushes, pigments, and sketches inside from Harlan. And on the front of the box is a small metal plaque that says Harlan Hubbard, engraved along with his address at Fort Thomas. So we know that this is a quite old piece, something that maybe was either given or purchased in the 1920s or 1930s, which is very exciting because what that means is that this is likely one of the paint boxes that Harlan toted with him on his canoe trips that he took on the shanty boat, and that he took around Kentucky and Indiana in the countryside painting his watercolors. And those of you who have seen Harlan Hubbard's watercolors know how beautiful and vibrant and jewel-like they are. So this has been a wonderful discovery. And in addition to the paint box and its contents, we've retrieved a number of his other supplies, which we've been able to identify from historic photographs of his studio, like this one that's taken by one of our many advisors, John Fettig, in the late 1970s. And many of the brushes and pigments that are now part of our collection, we can identify, and we have also found his woodcutting tools, which is very exciting. So many of you probably know his wonderful woodcuts that are very expressionistic and lovely. So it's very exciting to be finding these tools. Now, visual art was not the only creative discipline that was practiced at Payne Hollow, of course. And although Anna did not paint or draw, she was a superior musician, and she played both cello and piano. And although Anna's piano was removed from the home before Hubbard's death in 1988, our team is in possession of Anna's beautiful cello, which we're very proud to have. Payne Hollow also contained a trove of the sheet music that both Harlan and Anna Hubbard owned in their lifetime. And you can see penciled up at the top of this piece of music is Mrs. Harlan Hubbard, which is very nice. So we have this wonderful trove, and from it, they and occasionally their friends and their visitors would make music at Payne Hollow. And we're slowly cataloging and digitizing this collection. But in the meantime, if you're curious the kind of music that they love to play and you have a Spotify account, I've created a playlist called Payne Hollow Radio that you can search for, where I've been dropping in recordings of some of the pieces that they love to play together. So definitely check that out. And of course, Harlan and Anna Hubbard were avid readers. In fact, they read to each other almost every day, often by candlelight. And in a number of languages, not just English. They read Proust in French. That's quite a saying. And although a number of the books that they read were borrowed every 2 weeks from the Hanover College Library, with whom they had a wonderful connection, Payne Hollow is still filled with their books. And we have been working on those and cataloging them and preserving them. And Anna, good on her, trained as a librarian, actually left behind a shelf list of their favorite books, where they have included information on each edition and occasionally left reading notes, which has been absolutely fabulous for us to sort of prioritize which books we know we need to preserve first. And a few examples that we found while we've been cataloging are shown here. And the first that's here in the center is, and it's also up here on the table for you to check out, is really quite an extraordinary find. To give you some context, in 1915, Harlan and his mother, Rose, moved to New York City to be near Harlan's two brothers, Frank and Lucian, and their families. And Frank Hubbard was one of the earliest encouragers of Harlan Hubbard's artistic pursuits. And he even eventually helped Harlan Hubbard apply and gain entrance to the National Academy of Design in New York. So sometimes it's popularly said that Harlan was a self-taught artist. He was not. He had lots of self-exploration, but he was a trained draftsman and a trained artist. And we've discovered a wonderful monograph of the Spanish master Diego Velázquez, who was one of Harlan Hubbard's favorite artists from childhood. And it's inscribed to Harlan from Frank at Christmas 1915. And tucked inside it was this painting of a geranium that's likely one of the earliest known Harlan Hubbard watercolors, which is very exciting. And Harlan has explained in past interviews that Frank actually purchased him his first paint set while they were in New York and gave him some lessons. So it's possible that this painting is perhaps the product of one of those lessons. So that's very special. We also have a few of Anna's childhood books, including one of her favorites and a favorite of Harlan's mother as well, The Wind in the Willows, and I'm sure that's a favorite of many in the audience as well. But probably the most instructive of Anna's books at Payne Hollow are related to her incredible skill as the couple's non-traditional gourmet chef and nutritionist. And her favorite cookbook was Adele Davis's Let's Cook It Right. She loved this book. It's very well thumbed. It's stuffed with recipes and notes that can help us gain really instructive insight into the day-to-day food and health habits of the Hubbards, which is very cool, while they were living there at Payne Hollow. And inside this particular cookbook, Anna kept a remarkable trove of dated menus with calorie counts for both herself and Harlan. And she also listed the vitamins they used. She kept a detailed list of common ailments and how to treat them through diet and supplements. And so, for example, you can see here that Anna recorded what they ate for breakfast on April 11th, 1955. I'm sure we are all so glad to know that they had wheat, raisins, tiger milk, and a handful of soybeans each. She also left herself a note that if she or Harlan were feeling grumpy, cowardly, apprehensive, mentally confused, or forgetful, they needed to eat more yeast, of course. How well this worked, I don't know, but I'm tempted to try it myself on a grumpy day. And of course, the Hubbard Library and the notes tucked inside are also helping us better understand the landscape around Payne Hollow and what kinds of plants growing there Harlan and Anna Hubbard may have used while they lived their sustainable lifestyle. And David had mentioned that Deb White has been conducting research on the flora and fauna of Payne Hollow. And I've been working to try and cross-reference that list with accounts of the kind of wild foods the Hubbard loved to forage for their meals. Some of the books that the Hubbards read and the notes that they both kept are really helpful on that count. Here you'll see two fascinating books, also up on the table, that Anna Hubbard used again and again, and they're filled with useful information for foraging and cooking meals in a non-traditional kitchen and with non-traditional ingredients, both of which were important for the Hubbards. And as an example, they regularly used wild crops like goosefoot, purslane, blackberries, pokeweed, nettles, dandelions, elderberry, spicebush, lamb's quarter, and black walnuts in their cooking. A very exciting concoction. And we have journal entries like this one here from Harlan, describing foraging for Apios americana, called American groundnut or hopness, from April 1953, where he says, "Groundnuts have been one of our good foods this spring. They grow in abundance along the Indiana shore across from here. One can pick up a great stringy mass of them sometimes, and we have learned to eat them only the thin-skinned, light-colored ones, probably of new growth. We steam them, and with butter and salt, they are delicious." We're also learning loads about the gardens at Payne Hollow, both those maintained by the Hubbards and by Paul Hasfordter after them. And there are some garden notes that remain from Harlan Hubbard and his gardens. And eventually we hope to have a landscape survey and a landscape plan that can help us determine exactly what beds were where and what was grown where. But we've also discovered a remarkable trove of seeds preserved from the early Hasfordter years at Payne Hollow. Most of these are from 1990 to 1999. And several horticulturally minded members of our group are hoping to try and germinate some of them. We shall see. But if successful, we hope to begin a heritage seed bank of the kinds of seeds once grown at Payne Hollow. And although no seeds have yet been discovered from prior to 1988, we have copious written notes from Harlan Hubbard on the kinds of crops he and Anna liked to grow. And I've always liked this story that the Hubbards never grew cucumbers because neither of them loved them. And they didn't grow onions or garlic because they made your breath foul. And Anna hated that. I've often wondered whether I could possibly cook without onions or garlic. But seeing as no one who ever ate at Payne Hollow has complained of food lacking flavor, it must be possible. Now, it would be impossible to highlight all of the incredible things that we're learning at Payne Hollow as we sort through the contents of both of these structures. And we look forward to eventually sharing the results of this long cataloging project with the community once it's completed. And we hope to be a resource for future Hubbard researchers and scholars in the coming years. But we're also looking forward to the insight that this collection is giving us into the life cycle of Payne Hollow. And as we work with state agencies to apply for our National Historic Register status and to create our preservation plan, it's been very helpful in helping us formulate these important documents and understand what comes next. And perhaps most important, as we moved into the tail end of 2022, remember, we've only been around for six months, so all of this has happened in 6 months. Perhaps the most important thing as we moved into the winter of 2022 was being concerned with keeping our structures and their contents safe and dry until we have a restoration plan in place and that we can begin the historic preservation of the buildings. And our wonderful Building and Grounds Committee has been hard at work cleaning up, sealing, patching to keep unwanted critters and moisture out of the structures while we do our important work. And our team has also been working hard to keep the site from becoming too overgrown and making the trails and pathways safe and navigable as our workers and volunteers are on the property. And this summer and fall, as you can see, a lot of sweat and labor from intrepid committee members went into removing a number of fallen trees from the trails, which is no small feat, especially because when possible, we followed the Hubbardian way, which is eschewing the use of any electricity and employing hand tools when we can. So what's next for 2023 and 2024? David's given you some hints of some things we have coming up. I've given you some hints of the ongoing tasks that we have going on that will definitely carry us for a couple years as we finish those projects. But we're also planning for the future and trying to decide how Payne Hollow might be used later on. And in the coming years, we hope that your continued support will enable us to be a resource for the community in a few key ways in environmental stewardship, in education, and in creative expression. And where environmental stewardship is concerned, we have an incredible opportunity to one day make Payne Hollow the only permanently protected land on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River between Cincinnati and Louisville. That's an incredible opportunity and a great way to express the very Hubbardian impulse to protect nature. And Harlan even says in his book, Payne Hollow, "May it long remain as it is," it being Payne Hollow. "May it long remain as it is, not merely for our selfish enjoyment, but for the satisfaction it must give many people to know there is such a place. Few wild pockets are left along the river these days." And as David has alluded, we hope to explore partnerships with all kinds of organizations affiliated with the Ohio River Way, the Kentucky Waterways Alliance, as well as with educational institutions, and to really create a learning hub at Payne Hollow about riparian ecology. And in terms of education and programming, we have a team that is thinking big, and we love that. And we see so many opportunities to use the fascinating scientific, archaeological, cultural, and social context of Payne Hollow to partner with a number of local and national organizations. So just some of the things that we've considered. We hope to conduct archaeological surveys of the property eventually in order to learn more about Payne Hollow's possible connection to Indigenous cultures. We'd also love to work with local history organizations to connect Payne Hollow's history to that of nearby Preston Plantation and historic Madison and their connections with the Underground Railroad and the archaeological sites that have been uncovered by LG&E at places like Bain Klein. And perhaps most naturally, We believe the ongoing legacy of Payne Hollow has to pay tribute to the artistic, the literary, and the musical legacy of Harlan and Anna Hubbard and their successor, Paul Hassfurter. And we see excellent opportunities to create artist, writer, and musician residencies at Payne Hollow in the future, workshops and other educational programming related to art, culture, and folklore of the Ohio River Valley, and partnerships with local and national arts organizations to explore the wide-ranging impact that the life and art of Harlan and Anna Hubbard have had or could have in the future on contemporary lives. Now, I have just jammed a lot of information into this presentation, and so did David. So I want to mention again that our website is a great resource. Please visit paynehollowontheohio.org, where you can find lots of resources, news, contacts, and ways to donate. And please take some time to learn more about our work. But I want to close the program with some words that Harlan Hubbard wrote in his journal on this day, exactly 70 years ago. That to me are a perfect evocation of why we're doing what we're doing, why our work matters. And he wrote, "Today we came back to Payne Landing, back home. Here I become alive again, and dormant sensations and faculties begin to function. I come out of doors too, as definitely as if I had left a closed room. I feel an inward joy. All that I had dreamed was true, is true. The earth is fair, more fair than I had known or imagined. This was a warm day, still and misty, a faint sunlight filtering through. We drove over the hills and down along the river, watching the well-known features of the winter landscape, the recession of trees into the blue distance, the faintly green hillsides, many shades of tawny and russet, the sharp white sycamores, the slanting lines of the hilly country. After passing Carrollton and branching off to follow the river down, we become eager to reach the end of our journey. Already the country is closer, more real. The known farmsteads pass by, the road turns, and we leave it for gravel. It is like stepping down from pavement onto the cool earth." Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for that really incredible presentation. We do have mics at the either side of the room. If you all do have questions, please come down. We have just a few minutes, and I want to make sure that we don't stay and keep them for too long so that folks can get up and view all these amazing collections that are here. While folks are building up their courage, I'll throw one out. I find it really incredible that you're finding the wood carving chisels and the brushes and the pigments and the paint boxes. Where, if someone wants to see the product of all this this artistic output, where are some good places that folks could go and visit?
That's a great question. Actually, one of our wonderful Hanover, I graduated from Hanover. My partner graduated from Hanover. I know we have a lot of Hanover people in the audience today, but another Hanover grad named Hannah actually just curated a beautiful new permanent exhibit of all of Hanover College's Hubbards in their Duggan Library. And you can see those whenever the library is open, and there are lots. So it's a beautiful collection, and these are pieces that were handpicked by Harlan that he loved, spanning his career, that he gave to Hanover College for display. So that's a great place to see them. And of course, you get to see the beautiful view at the end of which is Payne Hollow from the point. So Hanover College is a beautiful campus, and you can see beautiful paintings there. And then the Behringer Crawford Museum, which is in Covington, Kentucky, is another excellent source. And they not only have a wonderful collection of paintings that were given to them by Harlan, but they also have a number of artifacts and research files that have been very helpful to me during the writing process for the book. But you can also ask them if you can see some of them too. So lots of great resources.
You know, another spot is the Fort Thomas Forest Conservancy. And it's interesting because, you know, the other places you see paintings and some of the books, it's fascinating, but you go see the home that he built and the art studio that's still there now. They have an artist in residence program up there at Fort Thomas, a sort of a part-time deal. So we're partnering with them. So it's just neat to go be in a house that he built. And so we hope that happens at some time down the road, and we just have to get our, you know, renovations done, and then we'll have to figure out our public access. And it could be on a weekly basis, and it's still to be determined.
We've got a question from someone joining us virtually, wondering if you all could expand a little bit on the conservation and the legal planning and the frameworks that you all hope to put in place to ensure the long-term protection of the site.
I had the great fortune of moving here to Kentucky, and I lived at Blackacre State Nature Preserve for almost 25 years, ran the program for 30 years. That's the first state nature preserve in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And that's one option. So we've had conversations, certainly working with Deb White, the retired botanist. She believes it deserves attention. And so could it be permanently protected through the State Nature Preserves Commission? They've done that through Jesse Stewart Nature Preserve. It could be a conservation easement. I think all those options are open. One of the exciting pieces for me is to look at beyond the 61 acres known as Payne Hollow. You know, as we sort of partner with neighbors, one guy right upstream, one couple just bought 113 acres. They're interested in forest health. Right downstream, which one of the shows, one of the slides had Preston Plantation, that's over 700 acres. So all of a sudden you have almost 1,000 acres of land that are kindred spirits. And so, you know, when you really look at the Ohio, one of the pieces I did with the Ohio Riverway, we had the Army Corps of Engineers do what's called a recreational access to the Ohio River. And federal standards are every 6 miles, you're supposed to have a boat ramp. And really, Trimble County is one of the most wilderness spots up and down the entire river. Just sort of interesting. You know, all you have to do is not look at Trimble County Power Plant, and you'd be in the middle of a wilderness area.
I was lucky enough to grow up on the campus of Hanover College in a home whose cabinetry was built by Mr. Hubbard. And I wonder about what kind of children's programs you're going to do, because I was fortunate enough to go over through Girl Scouts and also through our church group and visit with the Hubbards numerous times. And they were so generous with their time. In fact, I recall that was the first place I ever had goat cheese. So it's pretty exciting.
You know, one of the pieces that I find fascinating, and Joanne Weeder is back over here. Joanne, raise your hand right over here. She did the U of L studies and the U of L interviews with the Hubbards before he passed. And we're now working to interview Paul Hasselfurter on his contacts, but really widening it out and getting the stories, just as you mentioned, of, you know, growing up on the campus and, you know, with Hubbard cabinets but to answer your question, really, it's our dream to involve young people. You know, and how one interacts with the property, you can love it to death, and that's really a huge problem. It's 61 acres. There's no bathrooms right now. We'll eventually have one, maybe. We'll have something for sure. But as you think about that wilderness experience, you can't have it with 500 people walking through every day. And so is it virtual? One of the pieces that I find fascinating, and I'm not a technology guy totally, but the NSF grant that we're working with this summer is funded by a whole group involved in virtual reality. You know, and so it's interesting. Is there a way of experiencing it? I'd rather see the place really used intensively by artists in residence, you know, and by small groups. But even if you have an artist in residence, you know, you want to have somebody who stays there for a month without electricity, and you don't want to be bothered. You know, you want to have that Hubbard experience. So all those competing pieces is wonderful to work with. And so the education committee is starting to think through that whole process. And part of it depends on resources, part of it depends on relationships. But no, the bottom line, kids are going to be involved in Payne Hollow down the road.
And just quickly, one of the things that is so wonderful about Harlan Hubbard and the example that he and Anna left behind is the sustainable lifestyle that's becoming only more relevant as we trundle into global warming and environmental struggles. And our young people will need to learn these skills to help them care for our earth and help them care for the land around them so we can turn some of that around.
Well, with that response, you perfectly anticipated the other question that came in from the chat. So I'm really happy that we covered that. We are at 7 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up and let folks come up and view some of the materials that you all have brought. Come and see the table as well and get some more information. Thank everyone for coming out tonight. We really appreciate having you all out at Filson.